In the dead of night, the fugitives' gasps were ragged. Blood-stained leaves danced wildly in the wind, and ghostly howls echoed through the forest, mingled with the snarls of wild creatures. Perhaps they too had caught the scent of blood, lurking in the darkness to watch everything unfold on this cruel night. A hunched troll leaned against a tree trunk, his gaze sharp and wary as a cornered beast. His face, covered in incantation marks, was drenched in sweat, from tension, and more so from pain. This was no hunt. This was a flight for survival. The wound in his right eye throbbed again. Even a year had passed. That hideous gash, like his hatred, had never truly healed. He would never forget how he'd been driven to the brink on the battlefield of Eversong Woods. How, after a desperate last stand, his eye had been cruelly gouged out. Boiling hatred and fury blazed in his heart. Every cell screamed for revenge. Revenge. His severed left arm began to bleed again, pain searing through every inch of the wound as if it laughed triumphantly. Below his elbow, which once could have torn apart a beast, there was nothing but empty air. 2 hours earlier, he'd used a bone knife to hack off his own arm, inch by inch. There had been no weapons in his cell, so he'd broken one of his own fangs and sharpened it silently over countless imprisoned nights. It was blunt, and the process of cutting through his arm had been unspeakably agonizing. Yet he hadn't made a single sound of pain, not until he'd snapped the jailer's neck with one hand, drinking his blood to slake his thirst, not until he'd lit the first tiny spark of revenge with his own hands. Only in killing could he feel a shred of relief. Only slaughter and retribution carried out by his own hand could appease the bloodthirsty, brutal Loa, the wild spirits he served. Find him, at all costs. Faint shouts and flickering torchlight flared in the forest behind him. The pursuers were closing in. The old troll's single eye snapped open, and he ran his parched tongue over his lips like a starving serpent, craving the approach of prey. His remaining right arm, its strange three-fingered hand, tightened around the blood-stained bone knife. He could barely contain his eagerness to fight. Every bone in his body roared for slaughter. Splat! The elven ranger who charged into the forest had his head sent flying, warm blood splattering Zul'Jin's face, a sensation that intoxicated him. But in the next instant, a cold wind slapped his cheeks, and reason surged back, quelling his urge to butcher. He glanced at the forest, its peace shattered by chaos, then took a deep breath and fled deeper into the trees. Freedom. Freedom. It was what he must have. Only by shaking off these incompetent pursuers could he return to the Amani lands. Only with freedom could he rally the fragmented Amani tribe. Only freedom would let him raise the forest troll armies once more, breach the arrogant elves' kingdom, and avenge all his defeats and humiliations with the blood of thousands. He was Zul'Jin, greatest chieftain and priest of the Amani trolls, the Loa's beloved killer, the destined destroyer of Quel'Thalas, the High Elven Kingdom. He could endure defeat, but at the very least, he would not die here, miserably, like a worm or a stray dog, on ground so far from the battlefield. Swish, swish. He raced through the darkness, using the little magic he'd scraped together on his flight to heal the wound on his left arm, staunching the blood and sealing it temporarily. This was a drink of poison to quench thirst. It would suppress the troll's powerful natural healing instinct, making it impossible for the severed arm to regrow. In time, he would lose his right arm forever. But if he didn't, the steady drip of blood would betray his path. Having fought the High Elves all his life, Zul'Jin knew exactly what their rangers were capable of. Even a single drop of blood would let them track him to his hiding place in the forest. Though he hated to admit it, for forest troll hunters, elite High Elven rangers were the deadliest natural-born killers. But it no longer mattered, because the end of his quest for freedom was within sight. A night of relentless running had drained the last of Chieftain Zul'Jin's strength, yet he'd accomplished what no ordinary man could. He'd crossed the forests east of Hillsbrad foothills in a single night. A few kilometers ahead lay the Hinterlands Mountains, part of the Savage Lands. There, the evil branch forest trolls lived, though they had little connection to the Amani clan. Once he reached them, Zul'Jin would be safe. Hoo-hoo. Exhaustion was etched into Zul'Jin's rune-covered face. He had to rest. The hinterlands were far more dangerous than Hillsbrad foothills, He needed to conserve his strength for the perils of that untamed forest. And at that moment, whoosh, an arrow shot from the forest ahead, screaming through the air toward Zul'Jin's head. The sense of mortal danger made the hair on the old troll's neck stand on end. He threw himself forward, collapsing onto the soft ground as the arrow slammed into the tree trunk behind him, sending wood chips flying like shrapnel. Ah! Zul'Jin let out a roar of madness, his single eye blazing with ferocity and rage. Freedom had been so close, yet defeat had struck at the last moment. It drove Zul'Jin, who had sacrificed everything for freedom, utterly berserk. He was like a gambler who'd lost everything at the table, his eyes bloodshot. All the suppressed killing, rage, and madness within him erupted at once. He gripped his bone knife and charged toward the arrow's source, the posture of an exhausted fugitive blending with that of a beast cornered. Just like a year ago, on the battlefield of Quel'Thalas where the Amani trolls had been defeated. Even if he died, he would take 100 elves with him. My fate is not here. Bang! A cold blade hilt slammed into Zul'Jin's body with full force, shattering his desperate charge. A hunter who'd waited in ambush against a prey at the end of his strength. There was no way the old troll could fight back in such a predicament. His forward momentum flipped him over, and he crashed to the ground in a heap. Crack! A foot clad in deerskin boots pressed down on his left arm. A sharp blade slashed mercilessly across his fingers, severing all three along with the bone knife he'd clutched. Blood gushed forth, but Zul'Jin bit back the pain, his single eye filled with hatred. He looked up, and in the pre-dawn light, he saw his attacker. He saw the face that had haunted him every night in captivity, the face he'd hated so fiercely he'd wanted to crush its bones and devour its flesh. It was a cold face, gaunt as only a high elf could be, with lips always pressed into a sharp line. Most of all, those eyes, calm eyes, unwavering even as they cut through the old troll's fingers, even amid the brutality of splattering blood. As Zul'Jin stared at him, the figure in green chainmail and the iconic Farstrider green cloak stared back. After a second, those calm eyes narrowed, and a genuine smile tugged at his lips. Long time no see, Zul'Jin. Tyrion, you bastard who stole my eye. Kill you. I'll kill you. His voice was a scream, its resentment and venom unmistakable, the stance of a true mortal enemy. At the sound of the roar, the elven ranger pressed his lips together, lifted his foot from Zul'Jin's arm, and in the next moment, his blade flashed. Squelch! A blade engraved with phoenix patterns pierced Zul'Jin's chest, pinning the old troll and his flight to freedom to the ground. Ugh, you'd better kill me now. Zul'Jin's remaining eye seethed with pure malice as he stared at the elf before him. The elf exhaled, knelt down, and pulled a white handkerchief from his pocket to wipe the blood from the old troll's face. The gesture was as gentle as if greeting an old friend, filled with poise and elegance, a stark contrast to the desperate troll chieftain. Listen to me, Zul'Jin. I didn't come here to kill someone I hate. Killing you would mean nothing. I'd have gotten rid of you sooner or later anyway. The elf saw the hatred blazing in Zul'Jin's eye and shrugged. I came to protect someone I care about. Unlike you, once she's gone forever. A smile crossed his face as he tossed the blood-soaked handkerchief aside. He breathed in the blood-scented night air and said softly, You should have died a year ago, but the fools in Silvermoon gave you a new lease on life. Don't worry, you might live a long time, as a prisoner. You see, my pathetic kin couldn't keep you locked up, let you almost escape. It's fine, don't be disappointed in them. Don't take your life for granted. Don't wait until it's too late to cherish your miserable existence. When you're no longer useful, I'll end your suffering myself. I promise. Slap. A clod of blood-stained dirt was roughly stuffed into Zul'Jin's mouth, silencing his further curses and roars. The old troll thrashed like a beast in its final struggles, but he could never escape the grasp of a skilled hunter. And so, the noisy forest fell silent once more, just minutes after their confrontation. Nearly 10 minutes later, guards dressed in the same style of leather armor and cloaks as the elven ranger Tyrion, charged with watching Zul'Jin and the other Amani troll prisoners, burst from the forest. Their leader stood out. Unlike the others, he wore red chainmail and a red cloak. carried a massive phoenix war bow on his back and wielded a unique greatsword. At the sight of Zul'jin, pinned to the ground and weakening by the second, the ranger captain's eyes flickered with relief, but at the figure standing beside Zul'jin, shame surged instead. Captain Lor'themar Theron. Tyrion, the ranger who should never have been here, leaned against a tree, wiping his blade with a handkerchief. After cleaning the last trace of blood, he looked up at the silent red-cloaked ranger. Zul'jin, the escaped Amani troll chieftain and high-value prisoner of Quel'Thalas, has been recaptured. He tossed a rune stone to his kinsman in red armor, his voice cold and emotionless. By order of the Sun King and the Ranger General, I am here to take command of the Farstrider prisoner camp. You may leave at any time to report to your prince in Quel'Thalas. The red-cloaked ranger stood rooted to the spot, squeezing the rune stone in his hand, unsure what to say. Tyrion stepped forward, and as he passed Lor'themar Theron, he patted him on the shoulder and said softly, "So, dear senior, it seems you'll be returning with failure." Crunch. The rune stone in the red-cloaked ranger's hand was crushed in his grip, emitting a low crack, but in the end, he said nothing and turned to leave. The moment Lor'themar's figure vanished into the forest, Tyrion stepped forward and stood before the Farstrider Rangers, his voice stern. "I am Tyrion Dawnblade. You all know me. I think no further introduction is needed. From this moment on, I am in charge of the prisoner camp. I have brought a magic cell specially crafted by the mages of Silver Moon for Zul'jin. He is to be transferred there immediately. And now, the first order I issue as commander of the Hillsbrad Foothills prisoner camp. Because of this vile escape attempt, the unruly prisoners need a harsh lesson. Therefore, I order all prisoners in the camp, except Zul'jin, are to be executed on the spot." Chapter 1. Tyrion's Mission. Dawn broke, and sunlight once again bathed Hillsbrad Foothills. Elves far from their homeland stirred from slumber and began another day's work. But unlike usual, the atmosphere in the prisoner camp hung heavy with grim tension. For full years had passed since Zul'jin's escape attempt, yet for the long-lived elves, it was a mere blink of an eye. Word from Quel'Thalas indicates the Amani trolls have grown increasingly restless lately. Tyrion sat in the camp's modest command room, relaying the message to his subordinates. Before him stood the captains of his 3 Farstrider Ranger units, his second-in-commands at the camp. After 4 years of cooperation, they had become indispensable, capable lieutenants. A tactical map of Hillsbrad Foothills, hand-drawn by elite Farstriders, lay spread across the table. Tyrion's finger traced back and forth over its surface. Every elf in the room, including Tyrion himself, wore a somber expression, for this matter concerned their mortal enemies, the forest trolls. The day before yesterday, our scouts spotted troll headhunters nearby. Initial estimates put their number at around 20. Given their typical unit structure, those beasts likely brought 100 men this time. Clearly, some fools unwilling to accept defeat are plotting another rescue for Zul'jin. Tyrion laced his fingers together on the table, propping up his chin. After a moment, he tapped a spot by the river near the camp. Here, the supply point closest to the camp, and the only route from the hinterlands into the foothills. I've decided to lay an ambush here. If those trolls dare to come, I'm certain they've prepared to die. Our job is to send them to meet their Loa. But Tyrion, there's something you must know. The eldest ranger captain hesitated, his black eyebrows furrowing. He tapped a spot near the camp on the map, marked with a castle symbol, and spoke in a low voice. The Lord of Durnhold Keep has sent us several warnings. In the name of defending against orc invasions, he demands we report every operation to him in advance. You mean Captain Blackmore of the human kingdom of Alterac, correct? Tyrion rubbed his temples, making his pale golden, slender eyebrows twitch. He said softly, "If I recall correctly, he's also demanded multiple times that we coordinate with his infantry for large-scale local raids. What an insignificant upstart. Ignore him. We'll continue with our mission." Tyrion raised an eyebrow, glancing at the 3 silent ranger captains beside him. He cleared his throat and said, "At the very least, until he resolves his internal troubles and summons the courage to purge those vile foreign gladiators imprisoned in his keep, that captain has no right to interfere in our operations." We will not disclose any details to him, not for secrecy's sake." Tyrion spread his hands in a helpless gesture. "As you all know, there are trolls among those foreign gladiators. They could easily leak our kingdom's secrets. I'm sure, as a seasoned veteran, Captain Blackmore will understand our predicament." His blunt words drew laughs from the other two captains. The youngest captain, still visibly worried about potential conflict, spoke up. "Captain Tyrion, what if the captain refuses to understand? We are, after all, on human soil. If he refuses to understand, if he insists on interfering in our operations, tell him to go straight to his king. Then let his king send a messenger to ours." Tyrion's gaze fell on the command table before him. He exhaled and said softly, "Though we are on human land, this prisoner camp belongs to the kingdom of Quel'Thalas. Human laws and rules have no jurisdiction over us." The camp commander turned to the youngest ranger captain, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Our king paid handsomely for this privilege. Understand." Soon after, two captains were assigned their tasks and took their leave, leaving only two men in the meeting room. The eldest ranger captain, Rogelio Sunfury, was Tyrion's most trusted deputy. Before departing, he hesitated, then voiced his concern to Tyrion. "Captain, you may not care about this news, but the prisoner Zul'jin's condition has taken a turn for the worse. Likely due to the recent weather, his old wounds have flared up and become infected." Infected? The ranger looked incredulous at the news. He stared at his comrade, confirming Rogelio was not joking, then shook his head. "Rogel, I remember you first set foot on the battlefield 200 years ago. I, however, came later. I killed my first enemy, a troll, 150 years ago. Since then, alongside my mentor, my friends, and all of you, I've killed trolls with bows, blades, daggers, and torches. On the battlefield, I've seen trolls cut down, poisoned, burned alive, but never once have I seen a troll die from a wound infection. Have you?" "Of course not. I know what you're thinking, Tyrion." Rogelio shook his head and said solemnly, "I know trolls' regenerative abilities make death from wound infection impossible, but envoys from Silvermoon will arrive soon. As you know, our superiors want Zul'jin alive. I'm worried that if we ignore his condition, it might cause unnecessary trouble. Aren't we keeping him alive already, Rogel?" At Rogelio's urging, a cold glint flashed in Tyrion's eyes, and his voice turned sharp. But after a moment, his tone softened slightly. "I know what you're worried about, old friend. Rest assured, I won't let my hatred sabotage the plans of the higher-ups. My mentor has repeatedly reminded me, and I understand the stakes. But his injuries at this level won't threaten Zul'jin's life, so we needn't dwell on it." With that, Tyrion changed the subject, unwilling to linger on the topic. He looked at his old friend and asked casually, "Rogel, I believe it's been 2 years since you last returned to Quel'Thalas. Do you really intend to spend the rest of your days on human land, dealing with human nobles who are young enough to be your grandchildren, yet act as arrogant as your grandfather? I seem to recall little Cain is waiting for you in Silvermoon." At this, Rogelio smiled, his eyes softening. "Who would choose to stay here? Oh, I almost forgot to tell you. The Ranger General has approved my retirement request. Next month, I'll finally go home to be with my family, to spend time with little Cain. So this is my last month with everyone, Tyrion." "Hey, don't say that. Take it back." Tyrion's expression suddenly turned odd. He stood up and clapped Rogelio on the shoulder. "Please, stop tempting fate. Come on, old brother, we're on duty today. Let's go drink some wine." "Huh? Tempting fate? What do you mean by that?" "Nothing. Don't worry about it. Let's go quickly. While the sun's still up, we can even go hunting." For many, the most agonizing part of life is waiting for death to arrive. But there is another unbearable torture, the imprisonment of freedom, snatching it away from a creature forever. Nothing could be crueler. His fingers tapping the hilt of his blade at his waist, Tyrion stood silently in the darkness, watching the old troll moaning on the cold floor of the pitch-black cell before him. Zul'jin, the poor wretch he had captured twice, whose freedom he had stolen twice over. He was bare-chested, his green skin etched with ancient troll runes dedicated to the Loa, the beast spirits of their faith, which granted them fierce, wild power in battle. His frame was towering, a testament to his once unmatched prowess on the battlefield, Yet years of imprisonment and abuse had left him gaunt and emaciated. But none of this masked the venom and cunning glinting in his eyes in the dark. Notably, it was Tyrion who had personally gouged out the old troll's right eye on the battlefield. Cough, cough. Why don't you come closer and look at me, Tyrion Dawnblade, the coward who stole my right eye? You're 300 years old, yet you still cower like a fool, just like on the battlefield back then, hiding behind that woman, too afraid to face me head-on, like a frightened chick. Heh cough? Ah, cough, cough. From the darkness, he mocked Tyrion in a raspy voice, his taunts cut short by a fit of violent, gut-wrenching coughs. When he fell silent again, Tyrion stepped forward from the shadows, standing outside the cell and fixing the old troll with a calm gaze. But the chick holds your life in his hands. Zul'jin, you should have died long ago. You should have perished on the battlefield. Every day you live is a gift from the fools in Silvermoon, but it matters not. Watching you linger on like this brings me great joy. Tyrion paused, then said with regret, and what I regret most about this is that it came 170 years too late. Zul'jin had been captured 5 years prior, during a small-scale war in which Anastyrian Sunstrider, the current Sun King of Quel'Thalas, personally led his army to breach the Troll Fortress in Eversong Woods. At the war's end, Tyrion and his mentor, Larissa Windrunner, the current Ranger General, had captured the fleeing Zul'jin on the battlefield's outskirts at great cost. It had been a total victory. Zul'jin should have died then, but after consulting his advisors, the king had decided to imprison him outside the kingdom's borders. Their plan was simple. Zul'jin commanded great prestige among the Amani trolls. His capture would split the remaining trolls, whether they chose to fight to the bitter end or ransom their chieftain, and this division was exactly what the High Elves desired. It meant the nobles could weaken them with all manner of schemes. Trolls reproduced rapidly. These forest beasts could raise a new generation in a mere decade. A skilled elven ranger, however, required at least 30 years of training to take the battlefield, and a mage even longer. Coupled with the High Elves' abysmal birth rate, direct confrontation was never a viable option. A strategy of constant, slow attrition was the only way to defeat the trolls. But one must understand, what is rational is not always what is just. Given the number of elves who had died at Zul'jin's hands, the blood he had spilled, Tyrion was certain, if given the chance, every ranger in the camp, even in all of Quel'Thalas, would kill him without hesitation. 170 years? Let old Zul'jin think. The old troll struggled to sit cross-legged in his specially crafted magic cell, speaking in an infuriatingly taunting tone. 170 years ago, I was probably at the sacred ground of the Amani tribe, the altar in Zul'Aman. I personally sacrificed many captured elves. Oh, I remember now. It was a married couple. The man was brave. He tried to protect his wife, but I cut out his heart with a single blade. He died a miserable death. Thanks to his failed escape 4 years prior, the right arm Zul'jin had cut off himself had regenerated. He had not lost it in the end. He waved his fingers, mimicking the motion of tearing out a heart, a grimace crossing his face as he said with regret. As for the woman, what a pity, I've forgotten her face. I only remember the way she screamed, helpless and in agony, like a dying kitten. When I strangled her with my own hands, it brought me immense pleasure. The old troll blinked, fixing Tyrion with a stare. What was her name again? Teresa? Tessa? Or Talia? Forgive me. Old Zul'jin is too aged to remember such things. Can you tell me, my dear little Tyrion? The air in the cell froze. Seconds later, Tyrion spoke. Tellerith Dawnblade, my mother, and Carol Dawnblade, my father. My only family. You killed them. So I will eventually kill you and destroy the Amani completely. Do you have any objections to that? Ha ha ha. What a joke. Tyrion's accusation sent the old troll into a fit of laughter, his voice growing even more eerie in the darkness. You keep saying I killed your beloved parents, but look into your eyes, Tyrion. Eyes do not lie. When you speak their names, I see not a flicker of emotion in your gaze, as calm as if they were strangers. Admit the truth. You heartless bastard. Your parents mean less to you than that woman who protected you on the battlefield. The old troll gasped for breath, his wild runes writhing across his skin with each heave. I'm curious, Who truly is your family? The poor Dawnblade couple, or the widowed and beautiful Ranger General Larissa Windrunner? Oh, right. Her poor husband also died by my hand. And I've heard. Zul'jin wore a strange smile as he placed his hands on the cell bars, lowering his voice as if challenging Tyrion's last limit. I've heard she holds you in very high regard. There's a familiarity between you that transcends master and apprentice. Look at you, such a handsome young man. It's only natural, isn't it? Matters between men and women. Has no one ever told you, Zul'jin, that you have a terrible tongue? Swoosh. The elven battle blade was drawn, its glinting edge illuminating the cell's darkness as it stabbed precisely into the aged body before him, sending blood splattering in a rage-fueled spray. Squelch. Chapter 2: Orcs and Humans. The elven battle blade drawn in the dark was so dazzling. The master-crafted edge, like a streak of silver moonlight flashing through the darkness, glinted in Zul'jin's single eye that shone with an eerie light, as if he were expecting something. In the next moment, scorching, fetid blood splattered within the cage, on the ground, on Tyrion's battle boots, on the back of his hand. But across Zul'jin's face flickered the pain of a blade piercing his body, and a strange disappointment, as if this agony was not what he desired. What's wrong, old Zul'jin? Are you wondering why I didn't stab straight into your heart? After a moment, Tyrion's mocking voice echoed through the darkness. You see, ever since I came of age, I've hunted trolls alone. I know quite a bit about the Loa priest's tricks. If I kill your body directly, I'll only release your soul. So, I'm sorry, but your words are not as powerful as you think. The ancient human noble family of Trollbane is known as the Troll Slayers, you know? I've always wanted to test that title. Uft. The blade was pulled from Zul'jin's waist. The searing pain sent the old troll collapsing to the ground. Tyrion's pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his battle blade, staring down at Zul'jin. It hurts, but we both know this pain won't kill you. Your kind's regenerative abilities are comparable to filthy beasts. Don't worry, I won't let you die so easily, Zul'jin. Do you know why? Tyrion's turned and strode into the darkness, his voice lingering. Secrets have a price. There are no free secrets. Not now, not ever. And you know so many secrets. The price is your freedom. Tyrion's reached to his waist and pulled out a crystal ornament, shaking it in the dark as if showing off. Look, I made your right eye into an amulet, and it has quite nice magical effects. I really like it. It's far more useful now than it ever was in your head. Ea! A beastly roar erupted behind him. Zul'jin slammed his hands against the cage bars, which shimmered with pale, purple magical light. Don't let me escape again. Tyrion's, you'd better watch me closely. I swear, if I get the chance, I'll repay you for everything you've done to me. 10-fold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold. You little bastard. Zul'jin was right. Tyrion's felt little affection for his birth parents. It was only natural. You couldn't expect a 30-year-old soul to suddenly feel parental love for a pair of strangers, even though they were old enough to be his great-grandparents when they died. But ultimately, it wasn't just a matter of age. After his parents' death, Tyrion's was adopted by his mother's sister, the current Ranger General of Quel'Thalas, Lady Larissa Windrunner. Her husband had also been killed by Zul'jin, so Tyrion's naturally became another disciple of the Ranger General. Despite the noble blood of the Dawnblade family, which might have made him a more promising mage, he chose the path of the Ranger. He excelled quickly, becoming the best among the Ranger General's many disciples, even surpassing the once peerless Lord Themar Theron. Being an outstanding student, coupled with the adoptive mother-son bond, made them appear close. But this closeness brought trouble to both Tyrion's and Lady Larissa once he stepped onto the battlefield. In fact, Zul'jin's vile rumors were not only discussed by trolls, but also whispered about by the idle nobles of Silvermoon City. Worse still, Silvermoon had many nobles, and they were almost all idle. That was why Tyrion's, once the frontline ranger captain defending Eversong Woods in Quel'Thalas and a promising candidate for the youngest ranger lord, had come to the hills. To the High Elves, this place was nothing short of a barren wasteland, almost like self-exile. Tyrion's had come to prove his innocence and to prevent those terrible rumors from hurting his kind adoptive mother and family. he was here to protect them. Truly, this was the most troublesome thing he had faced in the 300 years since his rebirth. Oh, right. Did I mention he's actually a transmigrator? 300 years was long enough to fade memories of his past life of less than 30 years. Those memories had stretched tenfold, diluted by time. From initial panic to adaptation, then to embracing his new life, Tyrrhenas had spent nearly a century adjusting. Fortunately, given the High Elf's average lifespan, as long as he didn't die in battle, he had at least 2,700 more years to live. As for why he didn't run around the world playing prophet, it was because he lacked the ability. Azeroth was home to the bronze dragons, who could peer infinitely into the past and future, a power even the high elven kingdom of Quel'Thalas feared. And Tyrrhenas' surname was not Sunstrider. The cold King Anasterian would never rashly change national policy because of his ravings. In such a world, only a fool who did not value life would rush to be a prophet who could die at any moment. But honestly, instead of worrying about being killed by bronze dragons in the future, Tyrrhenas had more pressing concerns right now. Like the 3 blood-stained throwing axes hurtling toward him. Third squad. Ready. Volley. Standing on a small hillside in Hillsbrad foothills, he slashed down hard with his battle blade, chopping the incoming axes in half as he gave the order. In the next instant, 50 rangers about 100 yards behind him raised their war bows. Instincts etched into elven blood let them find the perfect angle with ease. The 50 archers unleashed 4 waves of arrows in just 15 seconds at breakneck speed. Sharp arrows cut through the sky in beautiful yet deadly arcs, gaining speed as they fell to deliver eternal death in the most terrifying manner. Below the hillside, over 100 Amani trolls crossing the river held up crude wooden shields, trying to block the rain of arrows. Trapped in the river, they couldn't scatter. They had to endure all 4 volleys. Under this storm of arrows, more than a third of the trolls were pinned to the riverbed. For trolls with powerful self-healing abilities, such attacks were not fatal, but they shattered their formation. Moreover, the arrows of the Farstrider Rangers on special missions were all lightly enchanted. Upon touching the ground, they would pin their targets down until the magic faded. And a broken troll formation meant an opportunity for the elves. Click! Tyrrhenas twisted his 2 battle blades together into a single golden double-bladed weapon, a unique elven design from Quel'Thalas that, when wielded, became a storm of death sweeping the battlefield. Behind him, Rogelio raised his halberd, and Sarant drew his twin blades. Each led their ranger squads, ready to charge into the enemy lines. Tyrrhenas fastened his faceplate to protect his eyes, raised his blade high, and shouted. Shout it loud for these bastards. Who are we? Arrows of Quel'Thalas. 70 rangers shouted in unison, their morale high as they stood fearlessly behind Tyrrhenas. As members of the Farstriders, Quel'Thalas' elite rangers, they were not only master archers, but also exceptional in close combat. Farstriders, charge with me. Tyrrhenas led the charge down the hill, reversing his grip on the dual blades in his right hand. Using the momentum of his descent, his agile body leaped into the air and crashed into the chaotic trolls like a cannonball. He gripped the hilt with both hands, twisted his feet upon landing, spun, and unleashed a 360-degree horizontal slash. As the blade flashed, for trolls around him were cut in half at the waist. Warm blood dyed the entire river red in an instant. Amid the trolls' screams, the Farstrider Rangers, wielding dual blades and filled with fury, charged into the fray like tigers descending a mountain, pouncing on the trolls who had come to rescue their chieftain. The confrontation was almost a rout. The vicious troll headhunters' skinning knives could not penetrate the rangers' well-crafted chainmail, while the rangers' weapons easily cut through the trolls' armor, and their heads along with it. Quel'Thalas had fought the forest trolls for thousands of years not by numerical superiority. The High Elves were at a severe disadvantage in numbers, but by absolute dominance in quality, from martial skills to equipment. Now, on human soil, facing these trolls who lacked numerical advantage and had already lost their will to fight, Tyrrhenas and his rangers only needed to reach out to grasp victory's hem. This could barely be called a battle. Clean up the battlefield, pile these bastards' bodies and burn them. The ambush ended in less than 10 minutes. Only 7 elves suffered minor injuries, while every troll was killed. Clearly, these trolls sent to rescue their chieftain were sacrificial pawns in the internal power struggles of the Amani. Their equipment and resolve were abysmal. They had been used as cannon fodder. The Rangers, their morale high, set about cleaning up. Tyrrhenas washed his blades and hands in the river, then joked to Rogelio beside him. Sometimes I wonder if the nobles of Silvermoon are using Zul'jin as bait to lure these brainless trolls to their deaths. What is it, Rogelio? Tyrrhenas turned to see Rogelio staring intently at the forest across the river. He couldn't help but ask, "Is something wrong?" "Over there. I just saw a flash, like those human knights in plate armor who are practically walking targets." Rogelio hesitated, whispering, "But it was only for a moment. I doubt I saw correctly." Knights? Here. Tyrrhena's eyebrows shot up. Hillsbrad Foothills was deep in the northern realms, a fertile plain belonging to the kingdom of Alterac, surrounded by human nations in the north. It was a permanent safe zone. Even the recent uproar over the green-skinned orc invasion had not threatened the foothills. Fully armed knights had no business being here. But Rogelio was an experienced veteran ranger. He was unlikely to make such a mistake. Recalling the recent orc invasion that had shaken the northern realms and cross-referencing it with his memories of history, Tyrrhena's breath quickened. If he remembered correctly, the orcs were attempting to cross the sea to attack humans at this very moment. With that thought, he patted Rogelio's shoulder. "Come, let's check it out." After entering the woods, Tyrrhenas spotted blood on the branches with sharp eyes. He drew his war bow in reverse, while Rogelio simultaneously pulled his battle blade from his waist. The two closed in on the slightly swaying tree ahead from different directions, and sure enough, they found a knight. Rogelio had not been mistaken. The flash had come from his stumbling movements. Seeing the knight's wounds, Tyrrhenas frowned. A gash had been torn in his sturdy plate armor, the flesh inside turned outward with scorch marks, a fatal injury, and one that looked like shrapnel from a cannon. Cannons existed in this world, and those enhanced with magical technology were no less powerful than those Tyrrhenas had seen in his past life. But the question was, how could there be cannons deep in Hillsbrad Foothills? Cough. Are you elven rangers? The knight spotted them, but before he could say more, Tyrrhenas knelt down and pressed a hand to his neck. Rogelio quickly handed over an elven healing potion, which Tyrrhenas roughly forced into the knight's mouth before pouring water from his hip flask down his throat. Cough. Listen to me, rangers. Before Tyrrhenas could ask, the knight gasped out. I know you elves rarely interact with humans, but now, you have to help us. East of the foothills, at the coast, the orcs have blocked the sea between South Shore and Menethil Harbor. South Shore is full of wounded. Our 3 ships meant to evacuate them have already. Those butchers, they're going to kill all our wounded. Please save them. Tyrrhenas pressed a hand on the agitated knight's shoulder, remaining non-committal as he asked in a deep voice. What is your name? What were you doing crossing this forest? I am Joe Aller. I'm Lord Gavinrad's adjutant. I was going to Dunhold Castle to beg for reinforcements, but unfortunately, I don't think I'll make it to Dunhold. Pain flashed across the knight Aller's eyes, followed by resignation. He grabbed Tyrrhena's hand and said firmly, but the wounded in South Shore, cough, please. They are heroes. If they must die, let it be on the battlefield, not helpless and brutal deaths. Please, elves. I have nothing to give you, but we have our own mission, human. So I'm sorry, but I must refuse. The blunt rejection filled Aller with despair. But catching sight of the iconic green Farstrider cloak behind Tyrrhenas, the knight suddenly jolted. He shouted with his last strength. Wait, Ranger. South Shore isn't just full of human wounded. There are your elves there too. Chapter 3 The Battle of South Shore. The knight, haughty as he usually was, now stared up with blood-stained eyes glistening with supplication. But Tyrrhenas was no greenhorn to war. Since coming of age, he'd hunted trolls alone, and in nearly a century, he'd witnessed 10 times more death than this knight could ever imagine. See enough death, and your heart hardens into stone. He cared not for the humans or orcs of South Shore, not one bit. There was only one thing that mattered to him. Snatch. Tyrrhenas grabbed the knight by the collar of his armor, his voice low and sharp as he demanded. The rangers who volunteered to aid you were supposed to be in Earthy Highlands. How in the blazes did they end up in South Shore? His gaze bored into Aller like a hawk's, making the knight feel as if he'd been cornered by a beast. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he stammered. Those elven warriors were stationed in South Shore to rest. They'd just fought the orcs and had scores of wounded needing respite. I swear, this wasn't intentional. It was a complete accident. Who leads them? Tarina's cut him off mid-excuse. The question caught Aller off guard. The knight racked his battered memory, then replied hesitantly, uncertain of himself. Their former leader was a lady, Illyria Windrunner, but she left for Dalaran under knightly escort a few days past. Her replacement is a man. I think his name was Theron? Forgive me, he's not one for conversation, and his name slips my mind every time. Lor'themar Theron. Tarina's shook his head in exasperation. What an unlucky soul. He sighed, rubbing his temples as he released the gravely wounded knight. Stroking his chin, he studied the man for a long moment before finally speaking. You won't die. Well, perhaps not. Glancing over at Rogelio beside him, he ordered. We haven't burned those troll corpses yet, have we? Fetch some of their blood and force it down his throat. I recall tales from 3 millennia ago. During the Earthy Wars, humans in dire straits drank troll blood and gained meager regenerative abilities. There's your chance, knight. Whether you live or die now depends on your will alone. Leaning in close, he whispered in the knight's ear. You might become a monster, but the choice is yours. Die a hero's death, or live as a monster and avenge your comrades. You don't want to perish for nothing, do you? Knight Aller fell silent. Tarina's paid him no further mind, instead producing a hawk whistle from his belt. A shrill trill cut through the forest, and within moments, 120 rangers, fresh from mopping up the battlefield, assembled before him. Listen to me, rangers. Tarina's stared southwest, his voice steady and resolute. You all know Lor'themar, former warden of the prisoner camp. We've never been close, but he is our brother in arms. He stands guard over our wounded, our kin, in South Shore. And now, a horde of orcs marches to slaughter them. I could abide Lor'themar dying a warrior's death on the battlefield, but I will not suffer him to fall to such cowardly butchery. Not one line in the Farstrider Code commands us to abandon our brothers and sisters in their hour of need. So move. Return to camp at once. The time has come for us to join the fight. Yes, sir. The rangers fell into formation and vanished into the trees, their captains leading them to prepare for battle. Meanwhile, the troll corpses were already stacked and burning, their stench choking the air. Rogelio approached with the knight's waterskin, now filled with a pungent, crimson liquid. Troll blood, a prized alchemical reagent to some, a deadly poison to assassins. Tarina's took the waterskin, his eyes narrowing as he met Aller's gaze. His voice was cold and steady. Hero or monster? Choose. I'll take the chance. Joe's voice was barely a whisper. Tarina's smirked, pressing the waterskin into his hand before clapping him on the shoulder. The harbor, capable of berthing 7 ships at once, was now smothered in choking smoke. Burning hulls drifted aimlessly on the waves, while the twisted remains of orc longboats sank slowly, their grotesque occupants sliding into the depths below. It looked like a cauldron of rotting offal. Farther out to sea, a tattered warship flew the banner of the horde, too distant to make out which clan it belonged to. Its fluttering crimson standard blazed like dried blood. The vessel served as a floating fortress, endlessly ferrying green-skinned orc warriors, fanged, snub-nosed, with wild black hair, onto small boats. The brutal clan sought to infiltrate and shatter South Shore's defenses through sheer numbers. This is catastrophic, utterly catastrophic. Having hacked down an orc warrior, the general paused to catch his breath, his eyes fixed on the capsizing longboats and the orcs charging recklessly into the rangers' arrow fire, as if rushing to their own deaths. The dread in his chest grew heavier by the second. Not even when Stormwind fell did I witness such unbridled savagery. Today may be our last. General, look out. A knight in plate mail tackled Gavin Rad to the ground just as 4 throwing axes whistled past his head, embedding themselves in a wooden post with a shower of splinters. The orc's brute strength was terrifying beyond measure. A stark reminder. Letting your guard down on the battlefield was a death sentence. Gavinrad's fall sent a ripple of chaos through the lines. Dazed, he clambered to his feet, only to see roaring orcs breaching their defenses inch by inch. Their jagged weapons sliced through the air, their faces contorted in rage. A soldier took a hammer blow to the chest, his body flying through the air before crashing at the general's feet. His lifeless, pale eyes staring up at Gavinrad, his mangled corpse bathed in blood. The general's resolve wavered. A gaping hole opened in their ranks. Even as fearless knights fought to plug it with blades, shields, and bodies, the once impenetrable line crumbled slowly beneath the orcs' relentless onslaught, amid screams and cries of despair. With the line on the verge of collapse, Gavinrad cast aside all hesitation. Grasping his greatsword with grim determination, he prepared to charge forth for one final stand against the butchers who had destroyed his homeland. Kill them. Slay every last greenskin. For the Alliance. Roars replaced orders as warriors, human and orc alike, clashed in a frenzy of bloodshed. 10 seconds after Gavinrad hurled himself into the fray, Lorthemar Theron, silent as a shadow, communicating only through hand signals since taking command, suddenly shouted, "Humans, fall back. Now, reinforcements have arrived." Reinforcements? How could we possibly have reinforcements? The thought flashed through Gavinrad's mind. But coming from Lorthemar, it could not be a lie, and with the line broken, the elves would perish alongside them regardless. At his command, the soldiers withdrew in unison to a recessed area within the harbor walls. Seeing their hated human foes retreat, the orcs howled in triumph, brandishing their weapons as they prepared to storm forward and massacre all in their path, only to be cut down by a withering hail of elven arrows. At that very moment, a standard depicting a blazing phoenix was raised high on the opposite beach of South Shore's coast. Tyrrhenus, mounted on his warhorse and clutching the banner, thundered up the hillside overlooking the town. His eyes swept the chaos below, and in an instant, he took in the dire straits of the harbor less than 300 yards away. Lorthemar, silent no longer, raised his swollen left hand, splaying 5 fingers wide in a Farstrider signal marking critical coordinates. Tyrrhena's clear, booming voice cut through the smoke and din, a welcome melody to the exhausted Alliance troops. "Rangers, maximum range volley formation. Send these cursed orcs back to the hell they crawled from. Fire." Chapter for the Dragon of the Sea. When the Rangers remaining in South Shore caught sight of the raised Phoenix standard, they erupted in cheers. Most of these Rangers hailed from the Farstrider Corps, led by Illyria Windrunner, the eldest daughter of Tyrrhena's mentor and adoptive mother, Larissa Windrunner, and Tyrrhena's nominal sister. To be honest, at least a third of Tyrrhena's reckless decision to come to their aid was because of that name. Asterisk swish. 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 Asterisk. A familiar storm of arrows cut through the sky once more. To Gavinrad, who'd just cheated death, this rain of flying arrows was the most beautiful sight in the world, descending from above like a forest sprouting from the earth, a forest of death and blood. Orcs, as their name implied, were beast-like humanoids, taller and stronger than humans, with green skin, bulging muscles, fangs protruding from their lips, tough hides, and a savage, belligerent nature. All told, they posed a greater threat than trolls. They were invaders from another world, said to have come to Azeroth in search of a new home. But judging by their relentless rampage that had laid waste to half the continent, these violent creatures had nothing to do with peace. Unfortunately for them, they lacked the trolls' superhuman regenerative abilities. So when faced with the High Elves' arrow volleys, for precise waves of long-range fire, the orcs who'd stormed the docks were left looking like pincushions. It was a massacre so shocking it defied belief. Charge knights. Slay these beasts. Gavinrad seized this fleeting opportunity, shouting with fervor as he charged forward first. With a clean, powerful horizontal slash, he cut down the 2 stunned orcs before him. Blood sprayed from their towering frames, a symbol of triumphant joy. Behind him, the knights, their morale soaring, roared as they locked shields and surged forward, kicking the orcs back into the harbor waters. There, the elves picked them off one by one with their arrows. Just as the last fleeing orc fell with an arrow through his chest, Lady Luck seemed to smile upon this desperate counterattack, showering her favor on the Alliance soldiers. Asterisk boom. Boom. Asterisk. The thunder of warship cannons shattered the ocean waves amid the smoke offshore. Gavinrad jerked his head up to see two balls of crimson flame plummet from the sky, slamming directly into the orc troop transport. Beyond the cannon fire, the silhouettes of three warships emerged in the distance, visible to all in South Shore. It's the Kul Tiran Navy. Another adjutant wiped the blood from his face, shouting excitedly to the general, "It's Admiral Dalen. He's finally here. The orcs are doomed. Yes, the orcs are doomed." In that moment, Gavinrad could see the battle's end. Overcome with joy, he took a step forward, only to stumble and collapse onto the ground, completely exhausted from the fight. As the three fully armed Kul Tiran warships, including Admiral Dalen's flagship, sailed into South Shore's waters and annihilated the orc transport, reducing it to splinters, the Alliance vessels closed in for the final blow. Everything had turned around in an instant. Victory was within reach, filling Gavinrad and the defending Alliance soldiers with elation. Cheers rang out across the harbor. But as everyone knows, Lady Luck is a cruel mistress. Just like the despair before it, this joy lasted less than 5 minutes. Asterisk roar. Asterisk. A colossal beast's bellow echoed across the sky above the other side of South Shore. The sound jolted Tarina's upright. He recognized that roar. He'd never forgotten it since the day he'd stared up at the Sunwell sky and seen that massive blue dragon. A dragon. That was the roar of a dragon. Dragons, legendary creatures of fantasy tales, possessed immense power, near impenetrable magic resistance, and wings that let them soar the skies. The libraries of Quel'Thalas were filled with stories of dragons. Beyond the overly romanticized fantasies of some mages, dragons were seen by the elves as mighty, arrogant, mysterious, and difficult to deal with. Yes, much like how humans viewed them. The only difference was that the High Elves' secret scrolls detailed every location in the world where dragons might dwell, and Tarina's had memorized them all. He was certain Hillsbrad Foothills had never been home to dragons, not in any age. The nearest dragon lair lay deep within the Hinterlands Mountains, bordering the foothills, 1,000 kilometers away, far beyond a dragon's hunting range. What was that sound? Gavinrad, the exiled general of Stormwind, propped himself up on his greatsword and rose to his feet on the blood-soaked docks. Seeing the same confusion on his soldiers' faces, he instinctively turned to the enigmatic High Elves. Clearly, the general believed the elves knew far more than humans. Lorthemar Theron, clad in red chainmail, exchanged a glance with Tarina's beside him, setting aside their past grievances for the moment. He turned his gaze to the sky and whispered, "That was the roar of a dragon." A dragon? Gavinrad's eyes widened. He'd grown up in the lands of Stormwind, the only human kingdom in the south of the continent. Dragons were nothing but ancient legends there. He'd never imagined he'd lay eyes on one in his lifetime. Faced with this unthinkable scenario, the veteran warrior who'd served 2 kings was lost. He followed Tarina's and Lorthemar's gazes upward, but lacking the elves' keen eyesight, he saw only a gray, overcast sky, the sign of an impending sea storm. "Are they here to help us?" Gavinrad asked softly. At this naive question, Lorthemar shook his head, while Tarina snorted. "You can describe dragons with every word in your vocabulary, except kind and merciful. They are dragons. Their sense of good and evil is nothing like ours." As a massive shadow emerged from the sky's darkness, Tarina's peered through the coastal haze and caught a glimpse of the soaring dragon. His expression shifted. Grabbing Gavinrad by the arm, he said urgently, "If I were you, I'd signal those warships to prepare for defense." "Why?" Gavinrad froze. Behind him, Lorthemar's gaze sharpened. He said grimly, "Because there are riders on those dragons. Orcs?" That was a perfect shot. Standing on the quarterdeck, Admiral Dalen lowered his spyglass and handed it to Cyrus, the Kul Tiran knight, standing beside him. The knight replied promptly, "It was Drake who fired that cannon, sir." A look of satisfaction crossed Dalen's face. Stroking his short beard, he watched the orc transport sink beneath the waves, destroyed by the cannon fire. The The middle-aged naval leader's eyes flashed with cold fury. Send those cursed greenskins to hell. Don't let a single one reach shore alive. The admiral clenched his fist and shouted, "In the name of the fallen. Musketeers, free fire." Dalen's roar echoed across the deck, and signalers relayed the order to the other warships. In an instant, Kul Tira's elite seamen raised their muskets and began a brutal, unrestrained hunt. Ever since the orcs had emerged from the dark portal in the southernmost dark swamp 5 years prior, they'd drenched the land in innocent human blood in just half a decade. Stormwind, one of the 7 kingdoms, had been completely conquered by the savage orcs, and countless soldiers had perished on the battlefield. Though they served different kings, these Kul Tiran sailors were more than willing to avenge their human brethren. "These orc rafts have been growing more frequent lately," Dalen remarked, watching as the drowning orcs were picked off one by the musketeers. Rubbing his forehead, he said to the silent knight beside him, "It seems the orcs aren't as mindless as we thought. They know the Wetlands Pass is treacherous, and they know we've ambushed the Thandal Span. They're trying to attack the northern kingdoms by sea now. But no one can defeat Kul Tiras under your leadership, sir." Cyrus replied dismissively, glancing at the orc warship now sinking into the waves. He said solemnly, "Your Majesty, it's time to dock at South Shore. Look at this howling wind. A great storm is gathering. Let the storm come. It will destroy these insolent greenskins for us." Dalen smiled, stretching out his hand to feel the strengthening sea breeze. Taking a deep breath, he said softly, "Cyrus, you've forgotten again. Don't call me your Majesty. I dislike that title. I am the Alliance's Grand Admiral now, and from the day I was born, I belong to the sea. So call me Admiral." "Very well, sir." The loyal knight looked troubled, but after a moment under Dalen's feigned glare, he said awkwardly, "Grand Admiral, please give the order to dock." "Excellent. Make for South Shore." The Admiral issued the command and turned to head for the captain's quarters to rest, only to freeze mid-step as a strange roar echoed across the sea. He looked up at the gathering haze, the prelude to the storm. In this weather, he could see nothing through the clouds. What was that? Some kind of beast? "Cyrus, have you ever heard a roar like that before?" The Admiral asked his most loyal knight, who'd already gripped the hilt of his cutlass. Shaking his head, Cyrus stepped forward, flanking the Admiral with 3 other knights. Clearly, these loyal men sensed an imminent threat. "Your Majesty, look there. South Shore." The wooden 3-masted warship's navigator shouted to the Admiral, his voice distorted by the rising wind. Dalen turned to gaze towards South Shore, where the hilltop harbor was blurred by the thickening sea fog, but flickers of firelight were visible. "They're signaling with torches." Cyrus watched for a few seconds, then turned to Dalen, whose expression had darkened. "They're warning us to be on guard. A threat is coming." "From where?" The Admiral, fresh off a victory, scoffed. Glancing around, he saw the sea churned by strong winds, and their enemies already sent to the bottom of the ocean. Where could danger possibly lurk? Just then, another roar rang out, this time much closer. The answer was obvious. In the sky, the Admiral and his loyal knights looked up in unison at the overcast sky. For a fleeting moment, a monstrous creature covered in red scales, beating massive wings, weaving through the storm clouds, with a thick tail and 4 claws, flashed before their eyes. "It's the dragon!" Roar. Amid a roar of hatred, the damp, cold air suddenly blazed with heat. A giant fireball crashed diagonally from the sky, slamming into one of the warships ahead of the flagship. It ignited the unfurled sails, engulfing the entire vessel in flames in an instant. Out of the mist and howling wind ahead of the fleet, the dragon, bound by reins, descended from the sky, hovering midair. Its serpentine eyes blazed with pain. On its scaled back sat over a dozen fully armed orcs, a bizarre, jarring sight. As the dragon drew a deep breath, searing dragon fire pierced the humid air, raining death down on the soldiers still celebrating their victory. Death came in the blink of an eye. 3 warships were engulfed by the falling flames. With their sails ablaze, they were completely at the enemy's mercy. "Your Majesty, flee at once." After the dragon fire dissipated, the flagship's deck was littered with charred corpses. But the warship, built with Kul Tira's special craftsmanship and timber, had survived the flames, defying the orc dragon rider's expectations of an instant conflagration. As the dragon beat its wings and rose back into the sky, Cyrus dragged Dalen toward the lifeboats. But the admiral struggled frantically. "Let go of me. Cyrus, release me. My men are dead. That cursed dragon. I'll kill it. Only if you survive, your majesty, can you hope to slay the dragon." The knight remained unmoved, his loyalty to the crown absolute. He valued Dalen's life 100 times more than his own. He tossed the admiral into a wooden lifeboat. Behind them, in the howling wind, the cursed dragon circled once more and dove toward the fleet. This time, the orcs on its back leaped off as they neared the sea, landing on the decks of the warships thrown into chaos by the dragon's appearance. They seized the opportunity to massacre the sailors. "Cyrus, I must go back." Seeing this, Dalen, already in the lifeboat, grabbed a short musket from beside him and shot an orc through the chest. The creature stumbled, fell to the swaying deck, and finally plummeted into the water. The admiral's ornate uniform was soaked, his black hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like an enraged sea lion. Grabbing the knight's arm, he shouted, "Drake is on the other ship. Kul Tiras cannot lose its prince. And I cannot abandon my son." PS1. Historical records state that Admiral Dalen suffered greatly at the hands of enslaved red dragons during the Second War, even losing a son to them. Of course, not in this attack. PS2. Oh, and some of you have asked if the protagonist specializes in bows or blades. He's a ranger, after all. Just look at Lorthamar. He uses both bow and sword, a master of close-quarters combat and long-range shooting. That's what a ranger is. PS3. Regarding the first generation of Death Knights. First, Orgrim forbade Gul'dan from using orc corpses, so all Death Knights had human bodies. Second, they were animated by the souls of the Shadow Council's warlocks, merged with human knight bodies to achieve a fusion of strength and magic. But while the concept sounded promising, the first Death Knights were more like plate-wearing warlocks, and they were outmatched by the first paladins who emerged around the same time. Chapter 5 Persuasion. Rescue from the Dragon's Jaws. The admiral refused to lose his son. He would not be a coward. A king could not abandon his prince. These were the instincts of any man. His words froze the knight, who'd been frantically rowing. Clenching his teeth, he stared at his liege, then thrust the oar into another knight's hands and said grimly, "I will rescue the prince. Knight Vic Cress, escort his majesty to South Shore." "I swear on my life." The other knight slammed a fist to his chest, then watched as his comrade leaped into the frigid sea, swimming back toward the 3 ships ravaged by dragon fire. Sigh. The admiral watched Cyrus charge alone into the inferno, his expression shifting. Seconds later, he shrugged off his sodden cloak, fixed his gaze on the last knight, and a resolve ignited in the naval commander's eyes. "Knight Vic Cress, if I do not return, tell the queen her husband did not shame the people of Kul Tiras. And tell my little Jaina her father was a hero. A captain never abandons his ship or crew. I am Dalen Proudmoore. I am no coward who flees from his son and loyal men." Asterisk splash. Asterisk. He dived into the ocean and swam toward the burning warships. The last knight, too late to stop him, watched his liege rush back into battle. Gritting his teeth, he drew his cutlass and leaped into the sea as well. "The Vic Cress family knows no cowards. Your Majesty, it is an honor to descend into hell with you today." On the dragonfire-ravaged sea, they were 3 warriors, 3 heroes, and 3 fools, were they not? At South Shore's docks, everyone stared in stunned silence at the 3 warships being incinerated by the dragon's flames in the gale. General Gavin Rad roared orders, commanding South Shore sailors to launch every usable boat to rescue King Dalen of Kul Tiras, trapped in the catastrophe. The 7 kingdoms of man had only just united against the orc threat. If Admiral Dalen, the Alliance's naval commander, perished on South Shore's waters, it would be an unmitigated disaster. Tyrrhenas watched the horrific scene calmly, fragments of memory and reality swirling before his eyes. After a moment, he turned and said quietly to the ranger captain beside him, "Sarant, check on our wounded." The captain instinctively pointed at the sea. But Captain Tyrrhenus, the human king, is still. Dalen will not die here. Tyrrhenus closed his eyes briefly and murmured, I know it. His fate is not here, and fate is not for us mortals to meddle with. Now go check on our wounded. Tyrrhenus. A low voice sounded behind him. Lorthemar Theron pulled an unused arrow from the ground and fixed Tyrrhenus with a gaze. I ask you to come with me to save that human king. The prince charged me with maintaining relations with the human alliance. As you see, it is only a young dragon. If you and I join forces. I refuse. Tyrrhenus did not turn around. I did not come for you, Lorthemar. I came for Windrunner's soldiers. They do not deserve to die here. As for the prince's orders, they are yours, not mine. With that single sentence, the already tense air between them turned hostile, even confrontational. Both were famous among Quel'Thala's younger rangers. Tyrrhenus had made his name 5 years earlier in the war against the Amani trolls. Alongside his mentor, General Larissa, he'd captured Zul'jin, chieftain of the Amani, and personally blinded one of his eyes. Lorthemar, in recent years, had repeatedly repelled Amani counterattacks on the Eversong Woods battlefield in Quel'Thalas, amassing equally impressive military achievements. Unlike the low-key Tyrrhenus, Lorthemar favored red chainmail, distinct from other rangers, and had long been favored by Prince Cael'dha's Sunstrider of Quel'Thalas, the next Sun King. That last detail mattered most. Lorthemar was a loyalist of the Crown Prince, while Tyrrhenus openly stood with his adoptive mother's family, the Windrunners, who had served the reigning Sun King for generations. Beyond political differences, Tyrrhenus knew the tragic fate that awaited Prince Cael'dha's. Thus, from the very start, he'd kept his distance from all things related to the prince. He is your prince too, the king you will swear allegiance to in time. Tyrrhenus, and do you not remember? The prince has praised your deeds publicly more than once. A cold glint flashed in Lorthemar's eyes as he whispered. He admires you greatly. He even hoped you would inherit the title of Ranger General someday, to help him build a more vibrant Quel'Thalas. Yet you have repeatedly ignored his overtures. Yes, he asked me directly, and I refused him. So it seems he chose you instead, did he not? Tyrrhenus finally turned to face Lorthemar, his sharp words cutting like a blade. If I guess correctly, you will soon be promoted to Ranger Lord, then step by step seize the Windrunner's position as general for your prince. Your prince seems restless, Lorthemar. Do you want to know why I rejected him? It is simple. His thinking is childish. He has no idea why King Anasterion keeps humanity at arm's length, and I say this. The alliance of 7 kingdoms and Quel'Thalas were never meant to stand together. As Lorthemar opened his mouth to retort, Tyrrhenus waved a hand to silence him. I have no desire to debate elven politics on human soil. I will say this clearly. Stay out of the war between humans and orcs. It brings nothing but harm to Quel'Thalas. As for you, and the Ranger General's position. Tyrrhenus glanced at Lorthemar, then looked away. Only the Windrunners, who have bled and died for Quel'Thalas for generations, are worthy of that title. Tyrrhenus spat out the harsh words and turned to leave, but Lorthemar moved with lightning speed, blocking his path in an instant. He took a deep breath. Let us set aside the rest, but you must come with me to deal with that young dragon. Why? Tyrrhenus' fingers brushed the hilt of his blade at his waist, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Do you dare threaten me, Lorthemar? It seems the lesson you learned 4 years ago did not teach you one thing. Wait, hear me out. Lorthemar stepped back and said urgently. Illyria Windrunner, General Larissa's eldest daughter, your nominal sister, defied the Sun King's orders a month ago, leading Windrunner guards to aid humanity's war effort. She returned to Dalaran these past 2 days to beg the prince for help. She shares his vision. Quel'Thalas should join this war. She is her, I am me. Her choices do not bind mine. Tyrrhenus snapped, but Lorthemar caught the flicker of change in his eyes, and a spark of hope ignited. Lowering his voice, he pressed on. Of course, I am not threatening you with Illyria, but you must know General Larissa's health is failing. The next Ranger General will likely be chosen within the next few years. In your heart, who is truly fit for that position? Illyria, is it not? I know you two have been close since childhood. You wish for her to become the next Ranger General, and I will say this. I wish it too. I will speak to the prince. I will voluntarily renounce my claim to the Ranger General's seat. In return, you must help me save King Dalen. Tarina's head shot up. After confirming Lorthemar was not joking, he asked, "Why do this? You do not strike me as such a great man." Lorthemar adjusted the phoenix emblem on his chest and said frankly, "Unlike the selfish you, Tarina's, I am willing to sacrifice for the prince and Quel'Thala's future. And I admit you are right. No one in Quel'Thala's is more worthy of the general's position than the Windrunners. I am also a disciple of General Larissa, do not forget. It seems you are loyal to your prince, Lorthemar, but do you think you know me? What makes you believe I will agree?" Tarina stared coldly at Lorthemar, his tone dripping with disdain. Lorthemar had no reply, but seconds later, Tarina sighed, the tension in his face easing. He unslung his war bow from his back and fixed his gaze on the young dragon wreaking havoc on the distant sea. Memories of orc and dragon history surged in his mind. Tarina's said in a low voice, "So what is your plan? Charge straight into the dragon fire to save them." Lorthemar was caught off guard by the sudden shift, but after a moment, his eyes also drifted to the distant sea, where the situation had grown dire indeed. "I will lure it away. You and the soldiers find King Dalen and his son." Foolish. Even a young dragon's breath is more than a mere ranger captain can handle. It only needs to turn its head, and you will be reduced to ash. And the orcs on those ships, they possess immense strength, more savage than trolls. We hold no advantage in close combat. Tarina's shook his head, narrowing his eyes as he studied the young dragon hovering low in the sky. Just as his memories had told him, it was a red dragon, enslaved by crude means. A sharp light flashed in the ranger's eyes. "We will solve this as rangers. Arrows cannot pierce dragon scales, but the orc riders are only flesh and blood. Listen to that young dragon's miserable roars. It does not attack humans of its own will, but is controlled by the orcs. We do not need to save Dalen. We only need to free the young dragon. That will be enough." Tarina's leaped into a wooden boat and shouted to General Gavin Rad, who stood anxiously on the shore, helpless. "Human General, find us sailors to row us over, to save your king." Chapter 6: The Savior. A young dragon refers to the stage when a hatchling, newly emerged from its egg, has grown for a short time. Given that dragons boast lifespans of tens of thousands of years, their juvenile phase typically lasts several decades. A young dragon measures between 15 to 25 meters in length, dwarfed by adult dragons, yet an unquestionable colossus to humanoid creatures. For context, adult dragons in Azeroth usually reach around 60 meters long, while ancient dragons, such as the most powerful dragon aspects and their mates, can stretch to 150 meters or even 200 meters. Beings of that scale, even when lying on the ground, loom like small mountains, to say nothing of when they spread their wings and soar across the sky. A storm brewed on the sea's off South Shore, and the small wooden boat struggled forward amid churning waves. Fortunately, the three warships ensnared in trouble were not far from South Shore's docks when the dragon struck. Otherwise, the fragile boats would never have made it to the rescue. On the battlefield ahead, the remaining human sailors fought their final, desperate stand against the young dragon circling overhead and the fierce orcs who'd boarded the ships. Truth be told, with the firepower of the three warships under Dalen's command, if they'd targeted the sky from the start, a hail of cannonballs would have driven off this inexperienced young dragon. But poor weather made aiming the cannons nearly impossible. What's more, the sailors lacked any experience fighting large flying creatures, and their fear of the mythical dragon compounded the disaster. Even the Dragonmaw orc dragon rider controlling the young dragon hadn't anticipated such success from what was meant to be a reconnaissance and sneak attack. This was why he forced the resisting dragon to stay, despite its struggles. Just as the humans feared, the orcs knew killing a human king here would deal a decisive blow to the impending final battle led by Warchief Orgrim. Orcs revered heroes, and none would abandon such a chance to become one. The dragon rider lashed out brutally with his whip, cracking it against the young dragon's neck as he snarled, "You useless fool of a dragon. I know you understand me. If you don't destroy these ships, your queen will suffer the most agonizing torment. Zulud and Necros will show her no mercy. You'd better know your place. Asterisk roar. Asterisk. The young dragon, struck multiple times by cannons fired by desperate sailors, let out a miserable shriek. Agony blazed in the noble creature's eyes. Thinking of the great red dragon queen's humiliation in the orc city, it longed to tear the villain on its back to shreds, yet it had no choice but to serve them. Aboard the wooden boat racing toward the battlefield, Terenas watched the struggling dragon. The ranger knew well that at this time, the vile orcs held the red dragon queen captive with an evil artifact. If the young dragons refused to obey, the artifact would torture their queen's very soul. The red dragons followed a matriarchal society, with their queen reigning supreme, beloved by all. They could not bear to see her suffer. Even these naive young dragons, barely more intelligent than human children, would stain their claws with blood and commit atrocities just to ease her pain. Charge! Burn away their last hope. A cruel grin spread across the orc standard-bearer's hideous face as he laughed wildly from the sky. I'll cut off that king's head with my own hands. Generous or grim will reward me for this. I'll have my own clan. I'll be a hero to all orcs, just like Hellscream. This fertile land belongs only to the orcs of Draenor. The young dragon roared and dove again, its tail lashing the air, scaled wings spreading wide. A river of dragon fire arced across the sea, a blazing path incinerating everything in its wake. As the flames neared the warship, the soaking wet Dalen shoved his son, who'd been manning a cannon, ready to counterattack, out of the way. The two tumbled onto the lower deck, narrowly escaping the deadly strike, though they looked utterly disheveled. At that moment, two rangers, one in red, one in green, leaped onto the ship's deck, now littered with ash and corpses. The stench of burning flesh made the slightly fastidious Lord Themar frown, but Terenas had seen far too many such horrors to be faced. Terenas glanced at the young dragon, wheeling around for a second dive. He clapped Lord Themar on the shoulder and said in a low voice, I'll draw its attention. When it dives, kill that arrogant orc. Why not me? Lord Themar questioned the decision, but Terenas didn't turn back. Because in Master's sniping class, you were always first, and I was second. You have your strengths, I have mine. You get one chance, Lord Themar. If you miss, I'm pulling out immediately. With that, Terenas sprinted across the smoldering ash. Reaching the deck's edge, he jumped into the water, and a minute later, reappeared on the deck of the outermost ship. Looking up, Terenas saw the young dragon beginning its dive. He drew his war bow, knocking 3 arrows at once. This time, precision mattered less than threat. Asterisk swish. 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 Asterisk. As the dragon plummeted to less than 15 meters above the water, a sharp glint flashed in Terenas' eyes. He released the arrows in a precise rhythm, one first, 2 following, hurtling toward the orc, who stood rigid on the dragon's back. Archery was practically etched into every elf's bones, and Terenas had trained for 170 years. Shooting had become second nature. Taming Azeroth's dragons was a dangerous new experiment for the orc horde. The first young dragon riders were the clan's finest, bravest warriors and hunters, men with an innate sense for danger. As Terenas' arrows cut through the sea wind, a stabbing premonition jolted the orc. He threw himself flat against the dragon's saddle just in time. He dodged 2 arrows, but the third pierced his arm. Asterisk AGH. Asterisk. The wound wasn't deep, but the arrow's tiny barbs tore at his flesh, gushing blood and searing with pain. The orc rider howled in agony. Meanwhile, Terenas slung his bow over his back, drew his blade, and beheaded an orc who'd lunged at him from the deck. With blood spraying around him, he didn't pause. He sprinted toward the churning sea behind him. Enraged by the attack, the reckless orc rider wrenched the arrow from his arm, the barbs tearing more flesh and numbing his limb. Spotting Terenas leaping off the deck, he lashed his whip hard against the young dragon's scales and roared, "Burn him to cinders." Forced by the rains, the dragon changed direction, fixing its gaze on the outermost ship. But as it drew a deep breath, fiery sparks crackling between its sharp teeth, Lord Themar, on the deck of a ship behind the orc, pulled his crimson phoenix bow into a perfect arc. A special armor-piercing arrow rested on his fingertips, his eyes locked on the orc's exposed back. The straight-line distance was nearly 200 yards, not far, but the sea wind would disrupt the arrow's flight, and the dragon's erratic movements added further difficulty. Lorthemar's breath stilled. Time itself seemed to slow. He adjusted the bow's aim by a fraction, just like in that final sniping class showdown with Tyrannus. That familiar feeling, absolute certainty of victory. Silver moon will rise under Prince Kale. That's starting with this arrow. Asterisk swish. Asterisk. Listen to me, Drake. Below decks on the sinking warship, the cabin, charred by dragon fire and doused by seawater, was flooded with cold water. Dalen hauled his son to his feet, brushing ash from his shoulders as he said urgently, "We can't stay here. We have to leave." "But father." Prince Drake inherited Dalen's stern features, and unbridled rage burned on his face. "Are we just going to be defeated? The Kul Tiran Navy, we've never lost at sea. I won't accept it." "No one accepts defeat, my son." Dalen gritted his teeth, gasping in the dark as he pressed a hand to his abdomen. Warm blood seeped through his fingers. "But we must survive to avenge this. I promise you, those cursed greenskins won't triumph for long." "Will we win, father?" Drake helped his father stand, and the two groped forward through the dark cabin. At his son's question, Dalen snorted in disapproval. "You're afraid. Drake, my boy, have those greenskins scared you?" "I'm not afraid. I just have their axes broken your body, or their war cries shaken your soul?" Dalen shook off Drake's supporting hand and said firmly, "If not, then why fear them? Don't hope for mercy from your enemies. They are cruel, invaders, destroyers, oppressors. That is their true face, so don't let them teach you fear. Teach them cruelty." Asterisk AH. Asterisk. No sooner had he spoken than Dalen cried out in pain, collapsing forward. Drake caught him just in time. The young prince felt the stickiness of blood through his father's clothes, and by the faint light filtering through a crack in the deck, he saw his hands were covered in red. "Father, you're wounded. It's just a scar. I'm not dead yet. A priest can heal this trivial injury." Dalen pushed himself up, snorting. "Help me up. Let's get out of here. Do you remember what I told you when I taught you swordsmanship as a boy?" "Yes." Drake slung his father over his back and nodded. "Then say it. War is a test of honor. Once lost, it is hard to regain, and scars from battle are a man's proudest medals." "Good. You haven't forgotten. I have enough medals already. It's time for you to earn yours on the battlefield. Your weak old father hasn't been cowed by them. You're stronger, younger, and have a higher starting point than I did. Are you still afraid of those beasts?" Drake grabbed hold of the deck crack, his muscles straining as he hauled himself and his father out of the darkness. As the first ray of light hit them, he said in a resolute voice, "I'll kill them all on the battlefield to prove myself, in the name of the Admiral's son." A drop of blood fell on Dalen's face, making the wounded king look up at the sky. In the next moment, his eyes widened in shock. Chapter 7: The Young Dragon Catcher. Asterisk swish. Asterisk. Just as Dalen and his son crawled out of the cabin, they saw Lorthemar's armor-piercing arrow shoot forth from his bow. The enchantment on the arrow glimmered faintly, cutting through the gloomy air like a bolt of white lightning. The red-cloaked ranger's bowstring trembled rapidly in the wind, the shot so powerful it sent a whistling crack through the air. In Dalen's widened eyes, the screaming arrow struck its target, the orc riding the young dragon's back. As the wind-driven arrow pierced his body, its immense force propelled the shaft forward, piercing his heart and blasting a gruesome hole through his chest. The orc's raised whip froze mid-air, his enraged face still contorted as if he might roar again at any moment. But as the young dragon lurched, the lifeless body finally slipped from the saddle and plummeted into the frigid sea like a stone. The splash it made was no different from any other corpses. The orc, who dreamed of greatness and stood mere steps from achieving it, was dead, felled by an assassin's arrow from behind, gone in an instant without a final word. Asterisk few. Asterisk. Tyrannus, surfacing from the water, and Lorthemar, leaning against the deck's mast, exhaled simultaneously. Though only minutes had passed, this gamble had been far more perilous than any prolonged battle. One misstep would have meant total defeat, even their own deaths. Yet they prevailed, though not everyone was satisfied with the outcome. That dragon's getting away. It killed so many of us. We can't let it escape. Prince Drake, rushing out of the cabin, pointed at the young dragon wheeling away in the sky and shouted anxiously at Lor'themar. Ranger, shoot it down. Lor'themar shook his head. Ordinary arrows could never pierce dragon scales, and arrows capable of doing so were not carried at all times. Seeing Lor'themar's helplessness, Drake gritted his teeth. He was no entitled prince. When others couldn't help, he preferred to act himself. Turning, he charged toward the largest cannon on the deck. Though a prince, he'd grown up under Dalen's harsh discipline. As a major in the Kul Tiran Navy, he'd earned his rank not through his father's fame, but through real battles against vicious pirates who roamed the seas. He loaded the cannon skillfully, took aim, and as the young dragon beat its wings skyward, the cannon roared, shaking the crumbling ship. And just as the red-hot cannonball exited the barrel, "Ugh, this water is disgusting." Tyrrhenas lifted his head from the water, glaring in revulsion at the floating orc corpses nearby. Looking up, he saw Lor'themar reaching out a hand. His left thumb was covered in blood, evidence he'd shot the killing arrow without even wearing a gauntlet. "You really do fight like your life's on the line," Tyrrhenas muttered, grasping Lor'themar's hand and climbing onto the deck. Glancing at the cannonball Drake had fired, he watched as the solid shot arced through the wind, barely grazing the young dragon's wing. "TSK, what a shame," Tyrrhenas said quietly to Lor'themar, who remained calm as he bandaged his wound. "So close." Bang. Frustrated at letting his prey escape, Prince Drake punched the ship's rail in despair. He clutched his head, agitated. This was perhaps the most devastating defeat of his life. 3 warships destroyed by a sudden young dragon attack, and the proud prince couldn't bear to let the killer flee. "Son, are you despairing?" Dalen, watching coldly, propped himself up on a sword and staggered to his feet. Nodding to the 2 elves with the dignity befitting a king, he stood behind the cannon, gazing at the young dragon wobbling out of range, and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Load for me, Drake. After all this, we can't let it get away. Use chain shot." "Yes, father." Prince Drake tore off his tattered naval uniform, used it to quickly clean the cannon's barrel, and loaded a chainball. The admiral, a king himself, took aim, with soot-covered knights assisting nearby. Watching the humans flurry, Tyrrhenas shook his head. Staring at the dragon flying farther away, he said softly, "You'll never hit it, it's too far. More powder. Double the charge. This cannon was forged by dwarf masters. It can handle the strain. Triple it." The admiral held a lit torch, and once the cannon was loaded and aimed, he turned to the 2 elven rangers, especially Tyrrhenas, and smiled hoarsely. "Ranger, don't be so pessimistic. Believe in miracles, and as repayment for saving us, the Proudmoore family will perform a dragon-slaying feat for our honored guests." Boom. Just as the storm off South Shore was about to break, the cannon, loaded with triple the powder, jumped, in its mount, teetering on the brink of explosion. The red-hot cannonball, wreathed in crimson flames, shot from the barrel, the dangerously overloaded gunpowder unleashing its full power. In Tyrrhena's eyes, the chain balls flew through the air, split apart at their peak, and whistled through the wind like spinning troll-hunting stones, striking the freed young dragon's wing with perfect accuracy. Driven by momentum, the chains twisted and tightened. The searing links wrapped around flesh and scales, and even from afar, they could see shattered scales and dragon blood spraying. This precise shot, combined with a stroke of luck, sealed the young dragon's fate. Its last chance to escape was gone. Roar. Uttering a scream of agony, the young dragon struggled to beat its wings, but its trapped left wing could not unfold. Finally, it spun downward like a falling meteor, crashing into the sea behind it amid helpless wails. "We did it. Father, you did it." Drake waved his hands in excitement, congratulating his father. At the same moment, Tyrrhenas and Lor'themar, seeing the dragon's trajectory clearly, paled. Without hesitation, each grabbed a survivor, turned, and leaped into the sea behind them. The other survivors were no fools. Everyone scrambled into the water, desperate to get as far from the dragon's impact zone as possible. 5 seconds later, The falling dragon slammed into the sea less than 15 yards from the first ship. The ocean, already roiling with the approaching storm, erupted into a 5-meter wave that effortlessly swallowed the tattered vessel, tossing it high like a tide before smashing it down. Asterisk crash. Asterisk. Terenas, swimming frantically in the water, felt as if a giant hand had pushed him toward the icy seabed. For a moment, the world spun wildly. He could only cling tightly to Admiral Dalen's arm to keep them together. In these waves, with Dalen's current weakness, separation would mean certain death. After the dizzying chaos, Terenas opened his eyes underwater. Seeing Dalen struggling beside him, he steadied his body, kicked his legs, and prepared to surge upward, only to be stopped by Dalen. The Admiral pushed Terenas' arm aside, pointing with his other hand behind the Ranger. Terenas turned to see Prince Derek, unconscious, slipping slowly toward the seabed. Dalen's message was clear: abandon him, save his son. In this life-or-death moment, the middle-aged man begged not as a king, but as a father. But Terenas shook his head at him. Fragments of memory lingered in his mind. Dalen would not die in the Second War. As Terenas had said, his fate was not here. As for his son, unfortunately, perhaps the brave prince perished in this naval battle. Moreover, the distance between them was too great. Even if Terenas abandoned Dalen now, he might not save Drake in the churning tide. This is fate, unchangeable fate. Terenas forced himself to carry the Admiral toward the surface. Even from the coldest, most rational perspective, saving a king was far more valuable than saving a prince. But just before he broke the surface, he glanced back and saw a flash of red as Lord Themar rushed toward Drake. Terenas watched as Lord Themar lifted Drake and swam upward, his eyes narrowing. Had fate been altered? Asterisk splash. Asterisk. The two burst from the water, Terenas gasping for air. Looking up, he saw General Gavinrad and his fearless sailors charging into the storm-torn battlefield. The Stormwind General threw a net over them, hauling them onto a boat. Dalen struggled to sit up, and upon seeing Lord Themar and Drake rescued onto another vessel, he finally exhaled in relief. Only then did the wounded warrior king feel the weakness washing over his body. Gritting his teeth against the blackness creeping into his vision, he clung tightly to Terenas' arm before losing consciousness, saying hoarsely, "Thank you, Ranger. You and your friend saved us twice. Now Kultiras owes you two a debt." Asterisk roar. Asterisk. In the distance, on the storm-brewing sea, the young dragon's screams made Terenas glance back. Human survivors were being pulled onto rafts, and some soldiers were wrapping chains around the dragon's body, seemingly intent on dragging it back to South Shore. On the far horizon, the storm's final stages were gathering. For hours later, outside South Shore, a farewell was underway. A moderate storm raged, but at the town's docks, soldiers sneaked food to a colossal beast. It was the wounded young dragon, dragged back by General Gavinrad before the storm hit, destined to be sent to Lord Darren as a trophy. Its red scales were pitted and scarred from battle. The Admiral's final shot had nearly torn off its left wing. Now, chained tightly to the docks with thick iron links, most of its body submerged in water, it seemed to have reached some unspoken agreement with the humans. Calmed from its rage, weak, and no longer attempting to escape. It showed little interest in the meat soldiers tossed into the water, but that did nothing to dampen their enthusiasm. As an invisible prophet who knew all, Terenas felt little curiosity about the dragon. Climbing onto his Quel'Dorii warhorse, he prepared to leave with the 70 elven rangers behind him. "I've left 30 men here to guard our kin." Terenas looked down at Lord Themar and said quietly, "I've kept my promise to you. I hope you won't disappoint me, Theron." Lord Themar placed a fist over his heart and replied softly, "I swear by my family's name, I will not." "Safe travels, Terenas. Perhaps when we meet again, I'll have to call you Lord." Terenas joked lightly with Lord Themar. After this battle, their awkward relationship had shifted. At the very least, they were no longer strangers. "I must go. We should reach camp by midnight. Remember what I said, Lord Themar. If possible, pass it on to your prince. Stay out of the humans' war with the orcs. It brings nothing but harm to Quel'Thalas." With that, Terenas turned his horse and, at the warhorse's neigh, the 70 rangers began their journey home. Lorthemar stood watching him leave, his feelings toward the so-called Ranger General's finest student complicated. It wasn't just that Tyrrhena's had always outshone him at the Ranger Academy. After this incident, Lorthemar had keenly sensed that beneath Tyrrhena's seemingly selfish exterior, there lay an unusual obsession with fate. "What have you been through?" Lorthemar shook his head and turned back toward South Shores into rest. But as he stepped inside, Sarent, the ranger Captain Tyrrhena's had left behind, found him, his face filled with urgency. Grasping Lorthemar's arm, he pulled him outside the town to a large pit filled with orc corpses discarded by the soldiers. No one had bothered to give these damned invaders a proper resting place. "Look here, Captain Lorthemar." Sarent ignored the foul blood and gore, jumping into the pile and pointing at a figure distinctly different from the other orcs. Human sailors found him on the shore. He's a troll, mixed in with the orc transports. I checked his tattoos. He's Amani. Amani? What are they doing with the orc army? Have these beasts allied with the orcs? Lorthemar's eyes widened, and in an instant, he realized something far more dangerous. His gaze shot northeast. Damn it, Tyrrhena's camp.